in addition to our interests in political activism and social movement and human rights and things like that, all three of us have careers in music as well. So wanted to talk about music
All right.
for a moment. Leon Siu um, is a famous Hawaiian musician and producer, singer, part of the duo Leon and Malia. Uh, can you tell us a little bit about your musical background?
Well, I started out as a very young child being exposed to music, like all of us. There's music around, but within the community and within our families, everybody played a musical instrument, usually ukulele. And so it was just automatic. We would just, as little children, we'd pick up ukulele and start to learn to play. My elementary school actually had a program to teach ukulele, and my elementary school had about 600 students, and about 350 of them played ukulele. We would have one day a week set aside when we would all bring our ukuleles to school, and we'd break up into groups and learn whatever level we were at the time. So so it was really quite a very natural exposure to music. Just everybody did it. Everybody played music, and learned to sing. And we learned a lot of Hawaiian songs, and as well as other kinds of songs. So growing up within that environment, I graduated to guitar and really had an affinity for folk music. So I was a child of the 60s, and I was playing guitar and listening to most of the American folk musicians, as well as Hawaiian musicians, and just self-taught guitar and got very interested in all that. And toward the end of the 60s, I started recording. I was performing from the mid 60s, then started recording. Malia and I teamed up in 1970, I believe it was, and we did our first recording that year in Los Angeles. And we were performing at that time at the Purple Onion in San Francisco, which is a famous folk club. Gave rise to the Smothers Brothers and Jim Neighbors, Phyllis Diller, comedians, Kingston Trio, and those groups all came up through the Purple Onion. And so we were there toward the tail end of that part, early 70s. So got a lot of exposure to music. I spent quite a bit of time in Los Angeles at that time as well, and rubbing shoulders with a lot of the pop musicians of the time, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and John Sebastian, and a bunch of others of that era, and spent time recording in Los Angeles. And learning the ropes, so to speak. 8-track recording had just come in. It was the newest thing. And I'm not talking about the 8-track players. I'm talking about with a 1-inch tape played that recorded 8 tracks. So it was more advanced than the Beatles had for Sgt. Pepper. They had a 4-track machine to do that.
Right.
So I had quite a bit of experience or exposure to working in the industry. Now, all along the line, Malia and I are also composers, and so we started a project in the early 70s of a symphonic work, and it's pretty complex, but we were writing music to go along with a series of paintings that were being done by my friend, and he was also my teacher at the University of Hawaii at one point, John Thomas, who was at that time painting a series of paintings called Boy with Goldfish. And so that series started to grow, and as we produced music to go along with that, there was this interaction in which some of the things that we wrote would influence his next painting, and then vice versa. So 7 paintings later, and we finally finished our cantata, we called it at the time. It took about 8 years to get it to, no, 6 years to get it to the point where we started performing excerpts with the Honolulu Symphony. And after about 50 performances with the Honolulu Symphony, we had finished the work. And so in 1979, we were asked by a company in Los Angeles called, what was it called, Varese Saraband, to record our piece, our Boy with Goldfish cantata, which now had grown into a fairly large piece. It was an hour and 6 minutes long. And so we agreed to do that, and they said that they wanted to use a brand new technology that was being developed, and that technology was digital recording. So so we became one of the first digital, one of the first pieces to be recorded on digital, and Malia and I were the first, some of the first artists to be recorded in digital technology. It was developed by a company called SoundStream, which at that time was a competitor to Sony, which was also trying to develop its digital recording process. SoundStream was slightly ahead of them. So we recorded with SoundStream, and our recording was released. That was 1979. By the way, we did that with the London Symphony Orchestra. Our composer, our conductor was Lee Holdridge, who was John Denver's conductor, as well as previous to that Neil Diamond's conductor. And we had all met in Hollywood working on various pieces. And so, you know, he'd be in one studio, would be in another, and so we got to know each other and asked him if he would be willing to conduct this piece. And so he said yes, because he had another job there in London around the same time, and that was the Muppet Show. He was conducting the Muppets in London, or some other film like that. Previous to that, he had conducted the big John Denver special on Alaska. Anyway, very well-known composer as well as conductor. So he went with us to London, and we recorded the piece with the London Symphony Orchestra. So the digital recording system was developed in Salt Lake City, Utah, and the components to record had to all be shipped to London to do the recording, and then brought back later to Salt Lake City for editing. So the editing at that time was very, very, what's the word, rudimentary, because they couldn't actually edit multi-tracks. They had only a 2-track stereo. And again, it was so experimental that they couldn't do much except to take one take and then put it next to the other take out all the extraneous sounds in between. And so it took 10 days to edit this, because programs were actually being written as we were editing, that they had to actually instruct the computer through a series of, you know, instructions or of coding to tell the computer what it needed to do. So it was painstaking, and they were using mainframe computers, which are woefully slow compared to what we have now. And I was telling the other day, somebody's asked me about that, and that the mainframe computers had to use, for memory, had to use these disk packs. And the disk packs are, the player was about the size of a small washing machine. And the disk packs was about this big around and this tall, and had 5 or 6 layers of magnetic discs in it. And you picked up the whole thing and you shoved it into this washing machine thing, like a top loader. And then that played, and the computers would then use that for its memory. We could only get a few seconds of memory of the pieces, because they were so dense as far as the sampling rate, 50,000 samples per second. The standard now is 41,000 or 41K, but it was 50,000 at that time, and it was stereo. So it was a tremendous amount of information for those computers to handle. It took them hours to go through this and do the edits that we needed to have done. But anyway, it took us 10 days, and we finally got the thing done. In the meantime, interesting side effect aside, many artists at that time, pop artists, had found out about digital recording, and they wanted to do their master tapes, their stereo master tapes, to preserve them or to convert them to digital, and then have them for themselves. So we, at one point, were asked to give up about a day to Fleetwood Mac, because they had produced their new album Tusk, and that they needed to put it on to digital recording, or transfer it to a digital master. And so they paid a huge amount of money. So we said, fine, the company can make some money, and we give up the day. Anyway, so we finished that recording, and now we had no place to play it. So here's this great recording, which we could hear in the studio, but we couldn't play it anywhere.
Well, why is that?
Because digital wasn't invented yet. I mean, CDs, and there are no digital players in the world outside of this room, and maybe Sony had a few. So in order for people to hear what we had recorded digitally, we had to now commit it to becoming discs, analog discs. But we also knew that the whole purpose of the digital recording was to make these really pure, to have these pure recordings without any kind of extraneous sounds or noise. And so in order to record it closer, to be more faithful to the digital recording, they had to sort of reinvent how they did pressed records. So 2 record plants in Los Angeles were retooled to handle a vinyl that was shipped in from Germany. And the vinyl was so toxic, you had to have licenses to transport it. So these barrels of vinyls arrived from Germany to these plants in Los Angeles to be pressed into recordings. Now, by then, John Williams had also recorded a piece. So there were several of us that were kind of backed up, ready to be pressed. But ours was the first. His piece, by the way, was a re-recording by the London Symphony Orchestra of the soundtrack to The Empire Strikes Back. So 1979. So our record company was able to get recordings pressed. The two plants in Los Angeles actually failed to get the proper fidelity we wanted because of some temperature problems that they couldn't manage the temperature sufficiently, even though they had totally retooled the plant and with a new water tank out in the parking lot to control the temperature. And so we had to they had to ship, the record company shipped all the vinyl to Japan, where it was pressed at JVC in Japan under surgical conditions. I mean, all the guys wore surgical masks, room temperature was absolutely controlled and all that. And that's how the first digital recordings were pressed in. And so ours was the first pressed. There was another one that was pressed, which was a an anthology of several other recordings, so including John Williams, Morton Gould, and some others. And so this was sort of a demo disc. And then eventually, I think several months later, The Empire Strikes Back was also pressed. But later that year, when in 1980, all of the audiophile conventions, our recording Boy with Goldfish showed up in all of them, because this became the disc for every manufacturer to play to demonstrate the quality of their whatever they were manufacturing, whether it was stylus or turntables or amplifiers, speakers. And in fact, I understand Bose blew out their speakers at one of those audiophile things, trying to show what the fidelity was on that. So our recording was hailed as the widest dynamic range ever recorded.
Oh,
up till that point.
wow,
yeah.
Wonderful.
So it became an audiophile sensation, and it was when the pressings were sold out throughout the world, basically through audiophile stores. And then 6 years later, compact discs came about. So by then, everybody had digital recordings, and it was several years later before we issued Boy with Goldfish on a compact disc.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you point out how important the recording process is. You know, many of my students or musicians, they don't always know how important it is to record yourself and to learn how to listen to yourself recorded, and how important the recording process is, because that is how you're going to sound to other people. You know, they're going to listen to a recording. They're not necessarily going to know about your hear you in person.
Yes, and that's what I tell artists also, that a live performance, you have a lot more leeway to work with, because there's a lot of factors that make up for what you sound like. You know, so you look good, or you're active and things like that. People tend to see that and put it together with sound, and which is a good thing, because it presents a whole package. But sound recording, that's all they hear, and you've got to be purposeful in how you present that.
Yeah, they say people tend to listen with their eyes,
Yes.
But when you hear the recording,
yes,
they're compelled to listen with their ears, and sometimes it can be shocking.
Yes.
If they're so used to,
especially to the artist who's never heard himself before.
Yes.
It really is an awakening. I mean, the first time I heard myself on a recording, I went, "Wow, is that what I sound like?"
Well, thank you all for your words of wisdom. Thank you for tuning in. If you like this video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe to our channel if you'd like to see more of our videos. We're out of time for today. But again, thank you both, Nelson and Leon.
Thank you, Nelson. Good talking.
Thank you, Leon.
We'll see you guys next time. Bye.